We're here in the fantastic University of Portsmouth, and the first question is actually about universities. So I just wondered if Pete Venables is here, whether I can ask Pete to stand up, wait for the mic to come, and then ask the question. I'll start at this end, Gerald, and move down the panel. So over to you, please, Pete.
Hi, candidates. We see the number of students coming into the city growing. How important are these students for the city and for the country? And what would you and your parties hope to do to either grow or control their numbers?
Okay, I think students are incredibly important and universities are very important. It's one of the great things that Britain produces is higher education, and it's a great export earner for the UK. And there are a lot of foreign students here who work in Portsmouth who bring a great deal of money into the university and into the country. I think probably we're now at the limit of the number of UK students. I think going above 50% of people going to university is probably too high. But one of the things we do know is, and ever since elementary education was brought in 1870, it was brought in for one reason only, that we were losing the economic battle with our competitors because British workers were not skilled enough and educated enough to be able to win that battle. And that remains as true now as it ever has been. We need higher skilled students coming out of universities, out of schools, out of colleges to make sure that our economy can prosper and both the city and the country can benefit.
Okay, thank you very much, Gerald. John, same question to yourself.
Well, education is incredibly important to an economy that wants to grow. The Brexit Party wants to see the abolition of the apprenticeship levy. There's not just university education that counts, it's vocation also that matters. So of course I think that any serious politician will say that a functioning economy and a prosperous economic power like Britain that wants to compete in the world and also compete at home and provide jobs needs a good quality and level of education. One of the other policies that the Brexit Party wishes to pursue is the abolition of interest on student loans. And I think that will be popular to many people who have finished education and gone on into education, particularly people that actually go on into vocational work after getting degrees that aren't particularly well paid, and the burden of that loan as they go on into work, into nursing or teaching, is significant. So yes, in short to your answer, education is incredibly important, and the university cities need members of parliament that understand that.
Okay. Thank you, John. Stephen?
It's my political belief that where you're born shouldn't determine where you end up in life, and it's been a real privilege in the last couple of years to get round to every school in my constituency and say to every young person, aim high, work hard, and you can achieve your dreams. And I was the first in my family to go to university, and that was a fantastic opportunity for me to gain skills and confidence. And I want to make sure that whatever your background, every young person has that same opportunity. And I'm really proud that in Portsmouth University they're doing their best they can to reach out to communities and encourage more people to come forward to go to university. But it isn't the only choice that young people have to take. I think we need to see more vocational opportunities, more apprenticeships. There are other ways that people can learn the skills for life to go on to succeed in life. I've specifically been doing some work in Portsmouth with Graham and the team around their work around a civic commission. I think the university is doing a good job locally, but I want to make sure that our university and all universities across the country are rooted in the communities that they serve. And I think Portsmouth University has a good track record on that and can do even more. So in answer to your question, I think universities are key. I want to see more young people coming forward to university, but there needs to be variety. And obviously we've got an important pledge that we would scrap tuition fees, which I think will create a level playing field for more people to come forward to go on to university.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Donna?
Well, two things for me really. First of all about the university itself, and then secondly about the community, to answer the question specifically. And we've got Graham Gilbraith sat here, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Portsmouth, someone I've worked with for many years. And all thriving towns and cities in this country have a university or have a very successful further education establishment. And the University of Portsmouth has gone from strength to strength. And when I was first elected, the university population was around 19,000. And now it's over 23,000 with an aim to get to 25,000. Now, my concern with us having such a brilliant and thriving university here is that we don't retain enough of our graduates in this city. They come here, they live here for 3 or 4 years, but we don't have the right skill set and the right employment to offer them to make them stay here. And so that's something that, as the Member of Parliament, I would want to be attracting some of the best companies in the country and internationally here to Portsmouth so that we can retain our graduates. Also, the University of Portsmouth was granted the gold teaching standard within higher education, putting them in the same category as universities like Oxford, which again has really helped with their recruitment and retention. And when I was leader of the council, I remember meeting the new owner of Portsmouth Football Club for one of the first times and saying to him, you know, for me as the leader of the council, there are 4 pillars in Portsmouth. You've got the university, the navy, the council and the football club. And you guys really need to be speaking to the university more. And he said, you know what, Donna? I can't do American accent. But he said, you know what, that's a really good idea. And now they are the shirt sponsors. I can't take credit for that, by the way. That was down to Graham and his team. But, you know, it's fantastic because it's Portsmouth University backing our brilliant football club. And finally, from me, about the community and around, there was a reference towards some housing there as well. I am slightly concerned about the level of student housing that has been built and the rate at which it's been built in the city centre. Now, it's not about the student housing itself, because by building good quality student housing, we are freeing up the rows and terraces of family homes, particularly in Southsea, and allowing families to live in them where those properties are therefore vacant, because first and second year students can live in properly managed accommodation, which is a good quality for them. However, a lot of the buildings that are accommodating students were formerly employment sites. And because of a planning law that allows permitted development, those employment sites, those offices, have now been converted into student accommodation. Now, I've spoken to the housing ministers about this over the last 4 or 5 years, and I think that that's something that needs to change. So if I'm elected as your Member of Parliament, I will be trying to lobby to stop that permitted development so that we don't lose protected employment space in the city centre and across the city of Portsmouth to have it converted into student accommodation, because members of the public are telling me that's not what they want.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Pete, for opening up our questions tonight. Next question, Shane Mason. Question from Shane. If Shane can stand up, if he's here. He's not. He's right. We've got a seat there. So I'll move on. On to, is Shay Bottomley here, please? Lovely. Question from Shay. If you could just wait for a microphone to come, Shay, that'd be brilliant. Thank you very much.
With President Trump claiming the contrary, is the NHS really up for sale?
Okay. Thank you very much, Shay. So, question about the NHS. Maybe President Trump getting his hands on our hospitals. Just that question as well, but just a general thing about what your party is going to do to, I think, protect our health services in Portsmouth as well. And if we can come down the line, John, if I can put that question to you first, please.
Well, I can't speak for President Trump, but I can't speak for Boris Johnson either. But I think it's highly unlikely that Boris Johnson or anyone else in their right mind would consider the NHS to be up for sale. I think that what we've got is an election. We've got a lot of kicking around of political footballs. Some of it's fantasy. A small proportion of it is fact, and the rest of it's something in between the two. So I can't imagine that anyone would stand for the NHS being put up for sale, and that Brexit certainly won't allow that to happen.
And how does the Brexit Party specifically going to be protecting and helping our health services moving forward?
Well, the Brexit Party doesn't have a national health service policy. It's not one of the priorities that we're putting forward at this election. What we're putting forward, and we're not incidentally going to form a government. We couldn't now if we wanted to, because we're not fielding candidates in every seat. So what we will be doing if we're elected to Parliament is first and foremost getting the mess that we're in sorted out. Things like the National Health Service and its future, relationships with Europe in particular and the rest of the world will come about as a result of that. But we will follow what happens when it happens, and we can't predict exactly how we're going to end up when we come out of Brexit in terms of the National Health Service. That will be a matter for whoever governs the country at the time, but we certainly wouldn't be sitting around suggesting that the National Health Service should be privatised or sold to the Americans, or anyone else for that matter.
Okay, thanks a lot, John. So same question, Stephen. So I think the reference is obviously with, free trade deal with America. It could open up the medical side. It could open up the health profession. So again, the same question, and your general thoughts on Labour's position on helping our health service.
I mean, I believe the NHS is our country's best institution. I'm hugely proud it was a radical, transformative Labour government that invested in the NHS and created it. And it's one of the reasons why I joined the Labour Party when I was just 16 years old. I do think the NHS is now at risk. And we've seen privatisation in the last few years. We've seen things hacked off. And I'm deeply concerned by what a no-deal deal would create with America and Donald Trump wanting to get his grubby mitts all over that. The facts are clear. We will invest over £40 billion in the NHS to sort out some of those issues. We've seen record waiting times. We've got to invest in our NHS. I think those that work in those services are the best public servants that we see. We've got to see investment in the NHS, and I'm really proud of my record of helping to secure 58 million for QA Hospital. But we've got to do more to support GPs. We've got to make sure we've got better mental health services. But I'm deeply concerned by the threat that a sell-off to Trump would create.
Thank you, Stephen. Donna.
Well, as someone who was born and raised in Portsmouth and born in one of our hospitals, in St Mary's Hospital, you might expect that I care very much about the NHS in Portsmouth. And every election we hear that the NHS is for sale. And guess what? It's not. We're being recorded. The Prime Minister has said that. And in fact, Mr Trump has said that he doesn't want our NHS. He doesn't want to take it over. But actually, I think the question of privatisation in the NHS is a really important one. Because actually, here in Portsmouth, our hospitals are being massively detrimented by a private finance initiative contract, introduced in 2005, a 32-year PFI contract. Guess who it was issued by? The Labour government. So when they talk... So when they talk about the NHS being for sale and creating Project Fear, it's fake news. It's not true. Our NHS is not for sale, and under a Conservative government, it never, ever would be. But furthermore, we're going to go on and invest. We're going to create 6,000 more GPs. That will lead to 50 million more GP appointments a year. We're going to do that by spending 33.9 billion in the NHS. And for us here in Portsmouth, it's already started. When Mark Cubbon, the chief executive, was appointed as the new chief executive at QA, as you would expect, I met with him. And I also met with the chair of trustees there. And I spoke to them about my concerns that when QA was rebuilt, and that was completed in 2009, part of that very expensive PFI contract, A&E is the same size now as it was when I was 10 years of age. They built this huge hospital around an old A&E department. And that's why in Portsmouth, we have 17 ambulances allocated for this city, 24 hours a day. And at some points over the last couple of years, they have all been parked up simultaneously at QA, sitting there for hours because A&E was literally log-jammed. Now, I'm delighted that through the lobbying that Penny and I have done and working with the Conservative government, we have been awarded £58 million in July this year, and A&E at QA is going to get rebuilt, and I'm delighted by that. And finally, I think from me, mental health funding. We are going to be spending over £90 million on additional mental health funding across the country, and that will create over 1,000 jobs with community practitioners in the NHS. So the NHS is not for sale. Please rest assured, with a Tory government, it's going to stay exactly where it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Gerald, 40 billion from Labour, 33 point something billion from the Tories. What are the Lib Dems going to do for the health service?
Well, you weren't listening to my speech, Mark. 35 billion, and we're prepared to put up income tax by a penny to be able to pay for it. But the question was about what the interaction with America might mean. We've been given this illusion that if we pull out of Europe, we'll replace all of that trade by a free trade deal with America. And the only things where currently there is no free trade with America is two areas. One is in health and one is in food. And so the Americans have been very, very clear that they want access to be able to sell into the NHS and to be able to take bits over, and also to be able to send us food that would not be allowed to be eaten in this country now. Chlorine washed chicken, hormone pumped beef. So those are the only two areas that we're being offered by the Americans, and pulling out of the EU puts us at risk of those things. So I think we are right to be scared of Donald Trump in so many ways. But on this, I think there is a real risk that the demand from the US to get free trade from our goods to go into the US will be really detrimental things to our NHS. Now, I'm really proud that the Labour Party did create the NHS. It created it from a plan written by a Liberal. And it's good to see the parties working together to create the great things. The Beveridge report written by a great Liberal. So it's good to see that we've got that cross-party vision to bring things forward. I have real worries for the future. And my worry is funding promises are okay, but I cared for my mum in the last year of her life. And as she was dying, going in and out of hospital and out of nursing home, about 40% of the staff who cared for her, who brought her lunch, who were her doctors and her nurses, and, when things got bad, wiped her bottom, were from the EU. Now, these people are leaving now. They're deserting us. And that means for the next group of people who are going to be in hospital, who need that care, those EU workers that we've depended upon to do all those things in the NHS are leaving in droves. And we're left with an enormous... So, Madam, I think there were some rules about trying to treat people with respect, and I hope we're doing so to you as an audience. So all those people being driven out, all those carers, all those doctors who aren't...
Can we let him answer the question? Can we let him answer the question, please? Thank you. Sorry,
Thank you. So I'm sorry that some people want to heckle, but the truth is that we will be at risk and our health service will be at risk when EU workers feel unwelcome here and aren't here to care for us and for our loved ones. And it's one of the byproducts of Brexit, which is so dangerous to us all.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. As I said, I know you're not going to agree with everything everyone said, but can we just let everybody have their say, please? And apologies, Gerald, if I didn't listen fully to your speech. I was slightly distracted at the time due to what had gone on beforehand. So apologies if I wasn't listening to every word. Right, next question, please. Thank you very much, Shay. Next question is from Christopher Vaughan, please. If Christopher Vaughan's here, please stand up and wait for the mic to come. Thank you very much, Christopher. Thanks a lot.
Okay, just one ground rule from me, if that's possible. I'd love an answer that does not involve Brexit at all, and I say it as an ardent Eurosceptic in the room, okay?
Right.
I'd just like to
I'll take you up on that one.
Brilliant,
the first mention, we're moving on.
Brilliant, fantastic.
That's not free speech.
I've had enough of that.
So my question is actually on crime and policing in particular. So given the increases we have seen in Portsmouth on drug and knife-related crime in particular, if elected, what will you do as a Member of Parliament for this constituency to ensure that issue is addressed in Westminster?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Christopher. I think a discussion on the campaign trail today with Boris Johnson, knife crime and how to deal with knife crime was brought up, so very relevant. Thank you very much for that. Come down, if we could start with yourself, please, Stephen.
So it's been a priority of mine since I was elected in 2017. We've lost 1,050 police officers in Hampshire, and cuts have consequences. My postbag has been full of correspondence from residents since I've been elected, raising concerns around knife crime, antisocial behaviour and other types of crime. It's a real issue in Portsmouth. And what I've been doing, my record of delivery, is I've been meeting with the district commander on a monthly basis to raise concerns and find solutions. I raised questions directly with the Prime Minister to say we need more police officers in our city. Sadly, the current government are only planning an extra 156 for Hampshire. I don't think that's enough when we've lost, I think, £80 million of funding for Hampshire alone in the last few years. We've got to find a solution that works because crime is having a massive impact across our city. So I've launched a campaign to get more bobbies back on the beat. We've got to make our communities much safer, and I want to carry on that work, which is why I'm asking people to re-elect me as their MP on the 12th of December.
Okay, thank you very much, Evan. Donna.
Well, if you elect me and I form part of a Conservative majority government, we are going to introduce new legislation to mean that child killers are never, ever entitled to parole. Now, you may think that that's not a particularly prevalent thing here in Portsmouth, but we have had 2 child deaths in the last 3 years. Babies. Terribly sad. And I think that if someone kills a baby, and it's unquestionable, they should spend their whole life in prison. We are going to spend £750 million creating those 20,000 extra police officers. Now, there's been some trolling and a bit of furore about my comments of how many police I will fight for and campaign for to get on the streets here in Portsmouth. Now, 156 police officers is how many police officers are currently out for recruitment in year 1 now in Hampshire. However, over the 5-year period, the term of government and the pledge of 20,000 police, we are expected to get up to 550 police here in Hampshire. And Portsmouth and Southampton are the 2 largest crime areas in Hampshire. And I've spoken to the Chief Constable, including in the last couple of days, and we'll be getting a large share of those. In addition to that, the additional numbers to get nearer that 200 number that I've referred to, the government is setting up the Serious Violent Crime Reduction Units, and they'll be funded with an additional £35 million. If you go onto the Conservative Party website now and go to pledges for the manifesto and click on crime and go down to police numbers, you will see a section about serious crime reduction units. And in that paragraph, it makes reference to 3 parts of the country: London, the Midlands, and Hampshire. Because we have had a spike in serious violent crime. And that's why I know that if I am your MP, I will secure a chunk of that 35 million to increase the number of police on the streets here in Portsmouth. As a magistrate for 14 years, I've seen how the trends in crime have changed. And that's why we will build 10,000 more prison cells. Because we believe that people should serve their time and that sentences should be proportionate to the crime. Now, that includes knife crime. We introduced legislation that if you are caught for the 2nd time carrying a knife, it's an automatic prison sentence. 3 MPs in the Labour Party voted against that. 1 was John McDonnell, and the 2nd one was Jeremy Corbyn. I think that is shocking. I also think it's shocking that in 1996, Jeremy Corbyn voted against automatic life sentences for repeat rape offenders. So we are going to be tough on crime. We're going to get more police on the streets, and we're going to make sure that we look after our children and our vulnerable, and that we stop people from being victims of crime.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. Gerald.
I used to work in the criminal justice system, so I used to lock up people who were killers and people who killed children for a living. And I think it's an incredibly sad and desperate occasion for everybody involved. And it's absolutely right that people are treated with real severity for appalling crimes. But in terms of the crimes that the police talk to me about here in Portsmouth, the ones that are on their high list that they want to tackle, in terms of violent crime, it isn't knife crime in Portsmouth that is the #1 concern. It's domestic violence. It's about people hitting people and hurting them within families. And the cuts to the number of police officers that there have been around this country and in this city has not helped that at all. But the way in which we operate and the way in which we need to deal with these really important issues like domestic violence, the things that destroy families, because we know that in dysfunctional families, the one thing that is there for every single family is domestic violence. And that needs to be our real concentration. If we can sort that, not only do we sort out masses of problems in terms of criminal activity, but we know that families do better in education. They do less. They need social services less. They need less from the NHS. Their kids do better at school. Their kids do better when they go into education. So for me, the big concentration would be on domestic violence and trying to make sure that we put in services to make sure that people are caught, they're convicted, but families are supported to be able to choose to come to the police and say we want something to stop. And that's why I was so disappointed that when the Conservatives ran the council here, they cut support for people with domestic violence.
That's not true. We did not. We increased it.
You cut it, Donna, and
we did not. We had more integrated domestic violence practitioners.
But the domestic violence budget was cut. So anyway, we'll have this discussion.
Might be, might not be. Carry on.
But finally, I'm sorry to say, and I'm going to break your law. The group of people who are going to be happiest about Brexit are the criminals who will be able to sit on the Costa del Crime in Spain, because we won't be able to get them back here and into courts and into prison here in the UK because the European arrest warrant won't be there.
Okay, you broke the rule. You broke the rule, Joe. So sorry, just one last point. So domestic violence, not doubting that. So we still are seeing rises in knife and drugs crime. So how does that get tackled as well?
You have to have more police going out on the beat, more police who are specialists, more police working with the community to be able to get the intelligence to be able to fight that. But when I talk to the police, their prime area of concern in terms of violence is around domestic violence.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that. Not disputing that. Okay, thank you, John.
Well, I almost thought that there was a consensus breaking out until we got to the last bit.
No, don't be silly.
However, I'm not going to mention
consensus.
the last bit because I'm from the party that the name we can't mention. But what I would say to you is this.
Just for this question, we'll bring it back in later.
There is certainly the issue of police numbers is critical. Now, we can't just pretend that producing 200 more policemen, and I think that Donna's numbers have gone a bit Diane Abbott on this one. It's some fantastic new opportunity, because people are asking, well, what happened to the 200 that were here already that have disappeared? And it is undoubtedly the case with domestic violence and with everything else. If you've got police on the beat and police on patrol, they act as a deterrent. Now, we've seen mindless vandalism in Portsmouth, targeted particularly at taxis and vehicles. Of course, people are wary of CCTV, but if there are police out on the beat, that has an effect. But with knife crime, I support measures on knife crime as well, but you've got to get to the bottom of what's causing knife crime. And you've got, amongst the youth population, peer pressure. Peer pressure is often driven by a drugs culture. It's often driven by people who take drugs not at street level, but at a higher level, and fuel the drugs industry. We need police to be getting in on that and tackling that and getting kids out of the way of peer pressure that is dragging them into this gang culture, which leads in many cases to death by knife violence. And these are real challenges, and they're not sound bites for an election. They are things that are and should be a priority for all parties. So any party that says it will increase police numbers and police resources, any party that says it will address the terror that many young people face because they can't get out of that vicious cycle, are entitled to our support, but they have to mean it. So let's hold them to it. If that's what they're saying they're going to do, they have to mean it. And if I'm elected as your Member of Parliament, that's one of the things I'll make sure that any Home Secretary and Government does deliver on.
Okay. Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Sorry, Christopher, we almost made it. I'm sorry. Next question, please, by Charlotte Lawrence. Do we have Charlotte? Thank you very much, Charlotte. If you just wait for the microphone, thank you very much.
As a teacher, education funding is key to how I'll be voting in this election. My own school in Southsea is currently facing a £130,000 shortfall in 2020. What will you do to ensure our schools are properly funded?
Okay, thank you very much, Charlotte. So from crime to education, another obviously a key subject in the election. So Donna, if you can start off by asking that question, please, on proper funding for our schools.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the question, Charlotte. It's a very important one because, you know, it's an old adage, but it's true. If you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you give him a net, you feed him for life. And actually, a good education for our children is what they all deserve. And when I became leader of the council on June the 3rd, 2014, you probably know this if you work in a school, if you work in education, 58% of our schools were rated good or outstanding in Portsmouth. So that's really bad, as you know, and it was put us in the bottom 10% of local education authorities nationally. So I set about doing a number of things because education was our number one priority as a Conservative administration running the council for 4 years. And when I handed the reins, reluctantly and sadly, back to Gerald in May last year, the number of schools in Portsmouth that were good or outstanding had increased to 83%. And that's thanks to the hard work of you and your colleagues. So thank you very much for that. Now, what the Conservatives will do is we are planning to spend £14 billion on education. So that is making sure that there is additional money, both for primary and secondary school children. Here in Portsmouth, I spent my capital budget, the largest chunk of our capital budget every year, on creating more school places. When I took over as leader with my colleagues, the Conservative Cabinet, we were told by our head of education that we had a crisis in primary school places, which I'm assuming you know about. We had a 1,068 primary school place shortage. And here in Portsmouth, that meant there were children that were 3 years of age. We're not talking about children that were just being born. 3 years of age who had no school place the following year. So we set about a really ambitious schools building programme, and I'm delighted to say that we achieved the target for the 3-year-olds, the 2-year-olds, the 1-year-olds, and looking at the trend in growth and population. And now that's moved into the secondary sector. We're going to spend an additional £400 million in further education, so for 16 to 19-year-olds. So more of them end up being Graham's pupils here at the University of Portsmouth. So I think for me, it's about driving up school standards. It's about making sure that head teachers are supported. It's also about making sure that there is enough funding for special educational needs, which we have a specific requirement for here in Portsmouth. And it's about making sure that our special schools go on and thrive, because we've got outstanding rated special schools in Portsmouth, which is a credit to everybody in that sector here in the city. So yes, you need more money. We know that. We've sorted out the economy now, and now we've got the money to pay for you and your colleagues to have the funding that you need to support our children's futures. So thank you for all you do.
Joe?
I'd like to answer this in two ways. In terms of locally here in Portsmouth, actually, three of us, myself, Stephen and Donna, are the leaders of the three groups on the council, and actually we work pretty closely together on education. So we started a building programme at primary school places, carried on under Donna's administration, and now we're working on secondary school places, and actually none of us have disagreed with that, and we've all put the money in and prioritised it. Nationally, I think there's a different issue in terms of the amount of spending that has come from government. And in 2015, this Conservative government decided to freeze the amount of money coming to schools. So in every year, there's been a real-term cut per pupil in schools, and that has to be reversed, because if those cuts continue down, then that means that the bits that make education such fun, creative, wonderful days in people's lives are the things that all get cut. And that's why it's so important that actually the numbers will not be hugely different, but 10 billion extra from the Lib Dems into education, 20,000 extra teachers trained and recruited and employed will make such a difference in trying to make sure that we drive educational attainment to standards. But we've got to make sure that there is the money to do the things that make education so wonderful, the arts, the music, all of those things that get pushed out if there's no money.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, it sounds as if the three group leaders are doing such a fantastic job that we should leave them where they are and I'll go to Westminster. There's nothing like an election to find the magic money tree, and in this one we've stumbled into a forest by the sounds of it. But it is self-evident that if you don't fund education, it's not an area that's going to produce an income. It's an area that requires funding, and if you don't fund education properly, you end up with the results that the pupils don't deserve. So we've talked about higher education, and we've also heard mention of places and lack of places. We've also heard mention of SEN funding, which is very important as well. And that costs money, and it's one area of government responsibility where money has to be allocated if you want to get results. And there's nothing more frustrating and frightening for parents than uncertainty in the education system and not knowing what kind of education or where their children are going to be educated. So this is something that does require proper commitment from government, and members of Parliament representing constituencies well have to fight for a cut of the education budget and fight very hard.
Okay, thank you, John. Stephen?
Charlotte, thank you for your question. It's an issue that hundreds of parents, teachers and governors have raised with me since I was elected as MP in 2017. I believe that every child deserves the best possible chance in life, and the best way to do that is by going to a good local school. But the facts are clear. Portsmouth is set to lose £3.4 million in the next few years, affecting 51 schools. We've already had stripped out of school budgets £34.9 million. That is completely unacceptable in the 6th richest country in the world. We've also seen a reduction in sixth form college funding by over 30%. And that's why it's been a top priority of mine to visit every single school and every single college in my constituency, talking to every head teacher, surveying every school to find out their views and concerns. I brought head teachers up to Parliament to lobby the Minister directly. And I'm really pleased that Labour will properly fund our city schools so that we can stop the cuts. I think it's shameful that teachers have to rely on donations for Pritt sticks, pencils and tissues in 2019. That has got to stop. So I want to see proper funding, and that's why I'm the only candidate in Portsmouth South that has signed the Stop the School Cuts pledge.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you. Thanks everyone for their answers. Charlotte, I hope that's given you some food for thought over the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much for your question. Next question, please. We'll rattle through. I'm conscious of time. We'll try and get as many more questions in as we can do. Is Thomas Fife here, please? Can I ask Thomas Fife to ask a question? Thank you very much, Thomas. If you just wait, if we can find you a microphone. Thank you very much.
With Portsmouth being home of the Royal Navy, what would you and your party do about funding for the Navy and ensuring that Portsmouth continues to play a major role in protecting the UK and our allies?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas. If I come back down the line to Gerald.
Okay. It seems to me that without the Navy, this city loses its heart, and that's why we were built. So in 2008, there was the Naval Base Review, which proposed shutting Portsmouth, and I was really pleased to be part of the campaign that turned that around so that the Navy remained here. And what we were able to show was that this was the best place to run the surface fleet from, the cheapest and the most efficient. And I'm really grateful that it was a cross-party thing with the support from the news and support from all over the south of England. When 2010 came, we were at risk of losing the carrier programme, and I worked hard to try to make sure that the carriers were built. Partly because great for the Navy, but partly because that meant that the Navy had to remain here in Portsmouth because there was nowhere else to put them. So the Navy is really important. The bit that frightens me most when I talk to naval families is their problem is not in terms of recruiting, but their problem with retaining people to stay in the Navy. Because naval families tell me they push their loved ones to leave the Navy all the time. And that's an enormous waste of resources because we're losing skilled people all the time. And partly it's about money, but partly it's about doing things differently. And the one thing that naval families talk to me about being really rubbish is the naval housing that they're given. And they say to me, the maintenance of those housing is done really, really badly. When there's a problem, somebody will phone up and say, have you got a kid under the age of 5? No, I'm terribly sorry, we're not going to mend it. So what I've done is for the council to offer to the Navy around this area is that we will look after their housing for them because we do it so much better than the Navy does. Because if families are saying to their loved ones, I want you to leave the Navy because the home you've put us in is so bad, so rubbish, we can't get it mended, then people will leave the Navy, we'll lose all those skilled people, and that's why we have to try to address it. It is important to have money. We should be having more warships. When in 1979, there was 59 frigates and destroyers in the fleet. We've now got a third of those, just 19. And we should be putting money into additional hulls, more surface fleet, more surface ships, to try to make sure that we're able to patrol the sea lanes that make our nation rich, because we make our money by trade. So there needs to be more money, but there actually needs to be cleverer thinking in the Navy about how to retain their most skilled people.
Thank you, Joe. So partly funding, partly looking after the personnel that we've got?
Absolutely.
Okay. John?
Well, I agree, and I would say that I would not only agree without the Navy, the city loses its heart. Without the Royal Navy, the country loses its heart. We are built on the strength and have been protected by the strength of our Royal Navy, which is under strength, and the surface fleet does need to be brought up to capacity again and quickly. And the Royal Navy serves not only a defensive purpose, but it is incredibly effective when it comes to emergencies overseas, both humanitarian and political, such as we saw recently in the Gulf with the hijacking of tankers that were not able to effect free passage because we didn't have vessels available and near enough to protect them in that way. So we are protected by our Royal Navy. We need to protect the personnel, both serving and former personnel, ex-servicemen, from the Royal Navy as a country, and any government needs to do that. And it is going to be an important issue for the Member of Parliament from this constituency to fly the flag up in Westminster and argue, and there are many people on all sides, incidentally, who agree that we need to get our surface fleet numbers up, but it's something that the Member of Parliament from this constituency will definitely have to champion.
Okay, thank you, John. Stephen.
I believe that the first duty of any government is to safeguard and protect its citizens, and I'm really proud that Portsmouth is the heart and home of the Royal Navy. And I'll be really honest with you, the reason why I went into politics is because my grandfather from Southsea was a D-Day veteran, left Southsea on his 17th birthday for Operation Overlord, and when he needed services at the end of his life, those services weren't there for him. So I'm hugely proud that our city is the heart and home of the Royal Navy, and I think it's a duty of all of us to make sure those that served and those that are veterans are given the best possible support in life. I've been a strong national voice on defence since I've been elected since 2017, because we are in a very, very difficult situation. We've lost 12 ships in the Royal Navy. We've lost 5,000 jobs in the Royal Navy. 91 MOD sites have been closed. It's the lowest defence spend in 20 years. I'm really pleased that it was a Labour government that invested in the new aircraft carriers, that commissioned those aircraft carriers that will bring £1 billion worth of benefit to our economy. And I'm really proud that in our manifesto, we commit to at least 2% of GDP to be spent on defence spending. I've been lobbying really hard to make sure that we get a new Drydock facility in the naval base. I think that's the best thing for our local economy. It will create £1 billion worth of investment again and 100 new jobs. And I want to carry on that important work because I know how vital it is for our economy and to the DNA of our city. I've had the privilege in the last couple of years to be part of something called the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, recognising that there's a set of MPs that have no history in the armed forces. So I spent my first year working alongside the Royal Navy. I've just spent a few months alongside the RAF, and that has given me first-hand experience of seeing the poor quality accommodation and food and treatment that those that serve our nation have faced. And because of that insight, that's why I've been taking action on making sure that veterans are better supported. I think it's shameful that veterans take their own lives. I think it's shameful the lack of support that veterans face in terms of their mental health. So I want to be re-elected on the 12th of December to stand up for our veterans, stand up for our armed forces, and make sure we get the investment that Portsmouth so desperately needs.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Donna?
Well, I'm proud that the Conservative government delivered the carrier programme, £1 billion under the Labour Party contract that was awarded. So we delivered it for just over £2 billion. And that money has therefore been saved and reinvested into the Ministry of Defence, which is really good news. Now, I'm also proud, and I don't have to say that the Conservative government, if there is a majority Conservative government, is promising that it would spend 2% of our GDP on defence spending. I can say that we have been, and we will continue, and we are going to increase that further. And we are going to continue to spend 2% of our GDP, and that is going to be growing year on year. And in fact, when you look across Europe, it's only the Baltic states and Poland and Greece that are actually spending 2%. Germany are woefully below their 2% of GDP, and France are just under it. These nations are bigger than ours, they have more people than we do, and yet they're not meeting their 2%. So I'm really proud that we are meeting that NATO commitment. So that's first of all.
It's not true.
Secondly, we're going to look after people. So through the Armed Forces, through the Armed Forces Covenant Scheme, we are going to be introducing a wraparound service and financial support for serving Armed Forces personnel. Too often, when couples meet, as they often do at work, and then they decide to have children, if they're serving in our armed forces, so here in Portsmouth, predominantly in the Royal Navy, eventually one of them, often the wife, the mother, will give up work. And we don't want that to happen, because we have got a skills shortage. And in actual fact, I've worked very closely with the Royal Navy for a number of years. And just this summer, I had a meeting with someone who's trying to recruit cooks for the Royal Navy. And they had a meeting at a building alongside here with Highbury College, because they were really, really struggling to get more chefs into the Royal Navy. Now, if I'm elected as your Member of Parliament, I'm going to make sure, you have it on record, this is being recorded, that the new Type 31 frigates are base ported here in Portsmouth. I won't be supporting them going to Plymouth. I'll be making sure that they come here. And I've already been leading a campaign to get one of them named after Portsmouth. They're all named after cities. So to have an HMS Portsmouth as one of those Type 31s would be a huge, huge honour for us. So looking after armed forces personnel, making sure they have the support they need, making sure that there's adequate housing for them when they're serving and when they're veterans, making sure that there is adequate mental health support, making sure that they get veterans are going to have cheaper train fares, they can get around the country to visit friends and family when they're no longer serving. These are all things that we have announced in the last week. So looking after our armed forces, having a Prime Minister that believes in our armed forces, having a Prime Minister that we are going to be proud to send to NATO to negotiate, or to the United Nations when something kicks off around the world, is really important.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panellists, and thank you for the question, Thomas. Rattling on to the next question, Kirsty Meller, please. Thank you, Kirsty. If you can just speak into the microphone, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Universal credit is pushing claimants into poverty and has widened the gap of wealth. If in government, how will you and your party ensure that the social security system is fair, kind, and compassionate?
Thank you very much. So, social spending, universal credit. If we can start with yourself, please, John.
Well, we won't be in government, unfortunately, but I think that you raise a point. There is a huge gulf in this country. There is an underclass that finds it very difficult to survive and is relatively powerless in terms of getting the sort of help that they need. The help, it's not just a question of financial assistance, it's actually often there are mental health issues that need to be taken into account. People are incapable or excluded from the workforce. So, you know, that is a social challenge that any government has to face. We will have to see what the programs of the main parties are, but I certainly recognise there is a layer in our society that finds it very difficult to actually cope with the system, and the system is often the problem. It's not just funding.
Okay, thank you, John. Stephen?
One of the things that I've been doing since I've been elected has been helping people on a day-to-day basis with those issues and challenges that they face, and I've helped thousands of residents in Portsmouth South with casework and problems. And I just wanted to tell you a story. I met a person who came to see me at my advice centre, and he brought all of his belongings to see me. And I said to him, why have you brought all those things with you? And he said, my wife has left me. I no longer have anywhere to live, and I have to walk to Fareham once a week to report there for my benefits and my immigration case. In 2019, I think that's unacceptable. And he then lifted up his shoe, and the soles of his shoes fell off. And I think politics is about putting food on the table and a roof over people's head. And that's why I'm so keen to be re-elected as your MP, because I want to help those people, those issues and challenges. Because boy, it is needed more than ever. When we've got rising homelessness, record levels of people going to food banks, and a third of children living in poverty in this constituency. So I'm hugely proud that my party have committed to scrapping universal credit, because I believe that we need to do much better and support the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you, Stephen. Donna?
Well, what will I do? Day one, if elected, I'll make sure that all of my staff are fully trained on universal credit and how it works, because I have a feeling that that will be something that they're going to need to know a lot about. Now, the Secretary of State at the moment, the current Secretary of State for Department for Work and Pensions, is a friend of mine, Trace Coffey. And obviously, if there is a Conservative majority government, for you people of Portsmouth South, having a Conservative Member of Parliament will give me closer and quicker access to that Secretary of State to be able to help the very people who are challenged by universal credit claims and issues. And I think the concept of the universal credit actually takes the hassle away from people once the claim is awarded and they are receiving it. So the concept is good. I think there have been some issues with the rollout. I think there have been issues with the length of time it takes, and that's certainly something that I would be campaigning to address, because I don't think that is good enough. But I just want to share one quick anecdotal story. There's a family in Buckland that I have helped over the last couple of years, and there are 5 generations of this family, from babies to the grandmother being, I think she's probably just turned 80. I saw something on Facebook the other day. And she worked for her working age life as a cleaner, and she worked very, very hard. She brought up her 4 kids. But between the baby and her, the bits in between, none of them have worked for various reasons. And through changes over the last 9 years to the benefit system, and to the fact that there is no longer a choice of being able to have a life on benefits, that you receive benefit if you're sick or if you're unable to work, but other than that, it's employment support allowance to support you getting back into work. And one of the people in that family, who is in his late 40s now, who is a grandfather himself, said to me, I was adamant that I was not going to do the computer course at Lake Road that I was told I had to go and do. I've done it. I've done another one. I've used Talking Changes, and now I'm working. And I've got to my late 40s, and I've got my first job. And I've held it down for over a year, and actually I'm thinking about going to college. Now, for me, that warms my heart. That, for me, is politics. That, for me, is giving people hope and inspiration that if they work, they provide for themselves. He said to me, I never used to be able to sleep. I was on sleeping tablets, I was on amitriptyline, I was taking all this medication, and now I've realised I just wasn't using enough physical energy. So now I have a sense of purpose, I'm happy, and I am actually grateful to the Conservatives for what they've done, and he's now going to support me. Who would have thought I ever would have got support from somebody like that? And actually, he is going to support me, and I'm really grateful. So whilst I acknowledge there have been some significant issues, and I'm grateful of you raising the question, I think we have to look back over the last 9 years and realise that we have got record low levels of unemployment. More people in work in this country than we've ever had before. And I think that is fantastic news. And to him, I say, if he's watching this, he knows exactly who he is. To him, I say, well done. You're an inspiration. Keep doing what you're doing. And I hope that many people around you continue to do the same.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. Thank you. Gerald.
If you keep doing the same thing and expect different results each time, then that is the definition of madness. We know that universal credit doesn't work. It might have been a good idea at the beginning, but we know it doesn't work. We know wherever it's introduced, homelessness rises. And there is an argument that it's only about the 5 weeks at the beginning where people don't get any money. But I think at the moment it is fairly clear that universal credit doesn't work and it needs to go as phase one. I think but I would like to broaden it out. My worry is much wider than that. Donna is right that work needs to pay. It needs to be better for you to be in work than not in work, because otherwise it's everybody else's taxes keeping you, and if you're able to keep you and your family, that's what you should be doing. But if people are really suffering and from mental health, etc., there has to be a safety net that works. And if you look at particularly benefits for people who are ill, the way in which people are put through those assessments about whether they're okay or not is devastating for people. Now, I've worked with somebody suffering both mental health problems and physical disabilities. And he got close to killing himself, as so many people do, because of the pressure put onto him by these private companies who are doing the assessment work to try to find out whether he could get his claim. Actually, because he was given decent support, he appealed and he got through, and actually he ended up with more money. But for so many people, they're pushed so hard they give up and they walk away, and then their lives are in chaos. So having these things all designed by people in Whitehall doesn't appear to work very well. The intentions are often sensible, the outcomes are often very, very poor, and we know from universal credit being rolled out around the country that we know irrefutably that it leads to a significant increase in homelessness, so there is only one answer: it has to go.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you very much. Thank you. Conscious of time, so this will be the last question. Is Antonia Harrison here, please? Antonia, thank you very much. So if we can keep the answers fairly succinct from the panel, please. But Antonia, your question, please.
What measures would you take to improve air quality in Portsmouth?
Thank you very much, Antonia. If we can start with Stephen. Air quality in Portsmouth, been a big talking point in recent times. Climate change.
I'm really proud that it was the Labour group on the City Council that declared a climate emergency, working with Extinction Rebellion and other activists back in March, and I'm really proud to have done the same in Parliament earlier this year as well. We've got dangerous levels of air pollution in our city. We've got to do much more. In Parliament, I was doing work with Friends of the Earth to deliver an ambitious environment bill. I've been consulting people around improving bus services locally. I want to make them more accessible and more reliable. I've been doing work around reducing single-use plastics. There's so much more to do. I don't think we've seen the ambitious leadership that we need to deliver on the climate emergency. We've got to move on from words, we've got to see action, and we've got to get on with this issue that we face today.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. Donna? Thank you. Donna?
Thank you for the question, Antonia. It's a really important issue, and I'm really pleased you raised it. And obviously, it is the green agenda is a very prevalent and a hot potato, and a lot of people are talking about this at the moment, and I think quite rightly so. I I'm proud that, and I guess it's through opportunity, so I don't want to over-egg the cake here, that we have the most environmentally friendly government the country's ever seen. And that's because of the green agenda. I'm not going to big up the Conservatives too much here. It's because it's become such a big issue globally, and particularly here in the UK. But actually, we are the first of the strong economies, of those big 5 economies. We are the first to commit to net zero by 2050. And I think it's really important when people are talking about net zero by 2030 or earlier, and let's hope we get there, that we are realistic and that we make sure that the economy and our industries are keeping up and working at the speed that we need them to hit that target. And like I say, I hope it's quicker. Now, coming to the Portsmouth solution, yes, our air quality here is not good. And both Gerald and I, having served as leader of the council, have had much interaction with DEFRA and with the Environment Agency and with the Department for Transport and traffic modelling. And I'm sure Gerald has sat through many meetings over the last 12 months looking at traffic modelling and our air quality assessment units. I mean, I've had the Secretary of State down here when I was leader. I met with the Secretary of State last for the Environment in October, beginning of October. And I think it's right that the government is pushing us on this area in the city. Now, I'm quite a practical person and I like to get on and get things done. And I actually think that through technology, this situation will sort itself out over the next 5 or so years. But I think here in Portsmouth, it needs to be sooner because the air quality isn't good enough. And let me explain why. 25% of all cars bought now are electric. And the one thing that stops more people from buying electric cars or having, wholly electric buses and trains is because of the battery power. And the Conservative government is going to spend £15 million in developing battery technology so that if you buy an electric car, you can drive many more miles than you can at the moment. And we're also going to make sure that wherever you are in the country, you are never more than 30 miles away from an electric charging point. Now, that switchover will mean that there are less pollutants in the air because the vast majority of the pollutants here in Portsmouth come from cars, buses, and from our ferries. Now, we brought in legislation, and this is thanks to the European Union, the only time you're probably going to hear me say that, but thanks to the European Union, they brought in some legislation that helped the environment, that meant that ferries, by April of 2015, had to have scrubbers on their chimneys to make sure that those harmful environments weren't blowing all across our beautiful city. So things are getting better. The nitrogen dioxide levels are coming down. The more that battery technology improves, the more that we have electric cars, the more that we have better public transport, and I would love to have some kind of tram system here in Portsmouth, something I spoke about a few years ago. As that happens, as that transition takes place, we will then see our air quality here improve. But we do need to keep the pressure on, and we do need to make sure that we are supporting all that we can, both nationally as a government and here locally with our local council.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you very much. Gerald?
Tackling the climate emergency and making sure that air quality is good must be the most important thing that we are doing. So there are practical steps that we can do, and I'm pleased that here in Portsmouth, with a Lib Dem-led council, we've been doing some of them. So we're having over 100 buses retrofitted with scrubbers to take out the bad, noxious fumes that come out of them. I'm also really proud that we're one of the very best cities in terms of having electric charging points for people to be able to charge their electric vehicles out on the streets, because we're a city mainly of places without off-street car parking. And if you just say electric cars can only be for people who can afford a place with off-street car parking, that's a really discriminatory thing. But I think we could be doing so much more if we had support from government. So I've written to the government to ask them whether they will try to help get people to make that change from using their car to commute to using the buses. Isn't it better for us to be able to invest in free bus passes for everybody in the city, to be able to get people onto those buses and out of those cars? And the government have said no. I've written to the government to say, why are you forcing us in this city to build every year over 800 new houses in Portsmouth, all of which come with new cars, all of which come with gas central heating, all of which produce pollution, and yet you're saying we've got to reduce air pollution? Why can't you leave us in Portsmouth to decide the number of houses that we should be building for our local needs? Why are you imposing this on us? And the government have said no. And I've written to the government to say, why do you think, why couldn't we have here in Portsmouth the same level of investment in supporting cycling and walking as they get in London? In London, it's 11 times the amount of subsidy that we get in Portsmouth. And I've said, like, why can't we have a level playing field with London? And the government have said no. So there are really strong practical things that we could do, things that I've been pushing for, and things that I will try to push for really hard in Parliament to try to make sure that we tackle both air pollution and the climate emergency here in Portsmouth, but also across the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So, John, if you're elected as MP, what would you be doing to take this issue forward?
Well, one of the things that I think local authorities need to do is look at their own planning regs. We've seen lots and lots of applications and licences granted for new build, but new build is not linked to the provision, for example, of charging points. So in recent years we've seen blocks, flats having to have cycle park facilities, but there isn't yet a link up with charge facilities for electric cars. But before we go crazy about electric cars, we also have to understand that there is an impact in terms of disposing of the batteries afterwards, and that's a fairly significant problem that electric cars create. There is an impact in terms of generating power to charge these cars. There is an impact on the economy about replacing excise and revenue on fuel duty as people move over to electric. But undoubtedly, poor traffic flow contributes significantly to air pollution, and significantly more than just the volume of traffic itself. And public transport, and effective public transport, is an answer also to that problem. The Brexit Party wants HS2 scrapped. It believes that we know it's over budget. We don't believe that it will produce the returns that it should and was envisaged, and that money redistributed to regions for improving public transport. So I think that there is an agenda now that relates to public transport. Particularly here it's important because of the congestions and bottlenecks, and it's those bottlenecks and congestions, if we can get rid of those, they are an early and rapid contributor towards reducing carbon and pollutants that are in the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Antonia. Okay, so that wraps up as far as the question is concerned. So just the last bit, as I said at the beginning, I'm just going to go down the panel. You can say whichever words you want to say, so the shackles are off. All I ask you is if you can keep it to below 60 seconds as your last pitch as regards why people should vote for you. We can start with you, please, Donna.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming this evening. A vote for me is going to be a vote to regain some sense of honour and some sense of organisation and productivity in Parliament, because it's been complete chaos. We've brought shame upon ourselves nationally by people, members of Parliament, not honouring the largest vote that this country has ever had. 17.4 million people. And the bedrock of any civilised society is democracy. And if you don't have democracy, you have another 5 years of chaos, of arguing about another referendum. Not one referendum, but two. One on the European Union and one on independence for Scotland. Shocking. So a vote for me is a vote for hope. It's a vote for strong leadership. It's a vote for investing in our children's futures. And it's a vote for investing in making sure that the NHS is not sold off to Donald Trump or privatised like the PFI contracts were. So please do consider voting for me, Donna Jones, on December the 12th to make sure that we get Brexit done and we start focusing back on public services across the United Kingdom and particularly here in Portsmouth. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Donna. Thank you, Donna. Stephen, 60 seconds start now.
Representing our community, the area where I grew up, has been the greatest honour of my life. Giving everything I have every single day has not been a chore or a challenge, but a privilege. Since 2017, when I set out a positive plan for Portsmouth, progress has been made. Tonight I've set out a record of delivery on schools, on police, on defence, on the NHS, always putting Portsmouth first. As the only candidate that can beat the Tories again, sort out Brexit and put it back to the people, if elected on the 12th of December, I promise to do so much more as an active local campaigner and strong national voice for Portsmouth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. John?
The legacy parties have let you all down. What we've seen, the last Parliament degenerated into complete muddle, and the problem isn't the fact that the Conservative Party wasn't able to deliver what it promised to deliver because it didn't have a majority. It did have a majority, but within the Conservative Party you have people that agree with you, Stephen, and will never deliver Brexit. And in this constituency you have a chance to have a Member of Parliament who will go and get this sorted out. This has been a divisive, bad experience for this country, and we need to get it done. And Donna, I'm afraid, cannot guarantee that her colleagues that are Remainers, that have taken the whip and gone quietly into this election with the Conservative whip, will actually deliver after the election. This is one of the only 2 constituencies in Hampshire where if you want Brexit, you can vote Brexit, do it, and let me keep their feet to the fire.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Gerald?
This election is probably the most important election in a generation. We'll decide if we're part of a confident, outward-looking nation, prepared to work with other nations to create free trade and peace with our nearest and closest trading partners in Europe. This has been our nation's policy for the last 200 years. Or we can turn our back on everything we've learnt in our history. Britain's place is working with other nations in Europe to create a continent that is free, prosperous, and where we address the climate emergency. We can only do that from within Europe, not by shouting from the sidelines. In Parliament, we need a strong, moderate, liberal voice to compete with the Labour and Conservative parties increasingly led from the extremes. Britain and Portsmouth needs a strong, liberal, moderate voice to stop Brexit. The Lib Dems can win here, and the Lib Dems need to win here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No, we're done again now, I'm afraid, sorry. So if I can just say, can you, I'd just like to thank all the panellists today for their honesty and for answering the questions and for behaving as well. So if you could just give a round of applause just for everyone for taking part in it. Thank you very much. I'd also like to repeat my thanks to the university, the senior staff, Graham for having us here, and the wonderful students for doing the filming. Thank you very much. And finally, I'd just like to thank everybody here tonight. Apparently there's a couple of other guys, I think Boris and Jeremy, they're having a bit of a chat tonight, but hopefully you've had some answers to some of the questions that are most important to you. This would have been quite a boring evening if you hadn't come, if you hadn't provided the questions. I think we've covered most of the key issues in the election, so please, if you can, safe journeys home and give yourself a round of applause for making tonight so enjoyable. Thank you very much.